All right. Hey guys, Hector here. Good morning. We're going to try this again. This is a new software that I'm testing out. So normally I do this on my phone. It just works so much better. But I'm actually testing out a new software. This is actually from my laptop, and it's a new software that I bought that's going to kind of help me to get this up and running for like some sort of podcast. But we'll see how it goes. So just bear with me, bear with any kinks or any snafus that may happen. So, cool. Let's jump right in. So, it's been a while since I've done a BJJ Strength Secrets. So, welcome to BJJ Strength Secrets. This is our weekly episode on Tuesdays where we talk about strength training for jiu-jitsu. We talk about kettlebells for jiu-jitsu. You just know that look at what is this over here? Just notice that when you're on my live feed or my show or whatever you want to call these, you're going to get jiu-jitsu stuff, you're going to get strength stuff, you're going to get barbells, you're going to get, we're going to talk about kettlebells, we're going to talk about like all this kind of stuff. If you're not interested in any of this stuff, you're in the wrong spot, okay? So today we're talking about strength training for jiu-jitsu, and the most important thing that we're going to talk about today's topic, is we're going to talk about three very common mistakes that BJJ athletes make. And number 3 is a doozy. This is probably the most abused and the most, committed mistake. I used to be probably the biggest offender of number 3. But what we're going to talk about today is the 3 common mistakes that all BJJ athletes make. And we're going to, excuse me, Number one is one of the most common things that BJJ athletes make is we're always in flexion. Okay, so what is flexion? Flexion is, see if I can do this right, the camera's backwards. So flexion is we're always in this hunched over position. Okay, we're always pulling things. We're usually on our back a lot of the time, so we're always pulling. We're always hunching over, and we're always in this flexed position. My elbows are flexed, okay? My neck is flexed, my upper back is flexed, and we're always kind of in this position. So, very common mistake is, as BJJ athletes, or just athletes in general that have that type of sport, even boxing or MMA kind of have the same thing, because again, in boxing, MMA, even Muay Thai, you're kind of in this like rounded position, right? I'm not going to get into talking about MMA or boxing because that's not in my area of expertise. But that's just something very common that I notice in their posture. And one of the biggest mistakes is, as BJJ practitioners, we never leave that posture, right? So as we're constantly in this flexed position because our sport demands this position. Our sport demands constant pulling and sometimes pushing, but we're always in this flex state. And so since our sport demands that, many of us, myself included for a long period of time, is we never leave our sport. So we're always, we tend to start walking around like this. And in my going on 17-year experience, career, whatever you want to call it, and my 17 years of experience in jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu athletes are have some of the worst movement patterns that I've ever seen. Jiu-jitsu guys have some of the worst movement patterns I've ever seen. So they're crazy flexible for the sport, but not for anything else, right? And that's how they can start to get injured when they start to get into strength training. They start trying to do some cross-training to help improve their mat skills as far as like the strength component and the conditioning component. And they continue to do flexion-type exercises, okay? They continue to do flexion-type exercises, and they're already in flexion most of the time while they're training, okay? So what we would want to focus on for our strength training is we want to focus on more exercises or movements that have extension. So we're constantly in this flex position. We want to focus on movements that take us into extension. So which is why kettlebells is probably the best training tool that a BJJ athlete should be using. Why? Because a lot of the movements take us into extension. They work both left and right sides. So like the kettlebell swing, that's constantly working extension of the hips. That's working extension of the hips and the ankles, because you got to stand straight up to finish out the swing. So it's going to help improve your posture. It's going to make your back stronger. It's going to make your legs stronger. It's going to improve your grip. Plus, it's going to constantly work extension. So that will kind of help to reverse a lot of that flexion that we'll go through on a daily basis. Another thing, some other good exercises is the deadlift, right? Whether it's kettlebell deadlift or barbell deadlift, again, that takes you to, helps you finish out with extension. The Turkish get-up. The Turkish get-up should always be a staple piece of your daily practice, okay? Because it's constantly working all 7 different movement patterns. It's taking you to extension. It's taking you into thoracic rotation. It's working both left and right sides. It's working stability of the shoulder. I mean, it's working everything. So it also has a lot of tremendous carryover to the way that we move on the ground. So adding more extension exercises like the get-up, the swing, going through some body-weighted movements, even maybe like a yoga practice or some kind of like we do ground force method. You can look into that on your own, groundforcemethod.com, which is kind of like in my opinion, like a better yoga. Okay, it's more practical. And working on the get-up. So the get-up, the swing, and some body-weighted movements kind of work on extension exercises as a BJJ athlete. How you doing, Gus? So as BJJ guys, to close up that point, we're always in flexion at all times because that's what our sport demands. But what happens is sometimes we don't leave that posture. So doing extension type exercises while you're in your strength training is going to have huge carryover, huge benefits, and it's going to make you more resilient. Okay. Number 2 is BJJ guys. I think athletes in general, but I notice a lot of this with the BJJ community and even the MMA community, is that we make our strength training more complex than it needs to be. We make it actually too complex by trying to add too many moving pieces. We're always trying to, we're doing HIIT training, and we're doing sprinting, and then we're going to go do weight training, and then we're going to go swimming, and then we want to take up Olympic lifting because we hear that Olympic lifting is great for power and strength and all this kind of stuff. So we're constantly making our strength training more and more complex, when the nature of our sport, jiu-jitsu, is a very complicated sport. Very, very complicated. For those of you that are watching right now and you've done jiu-jitsu, you know how complicated and how detailed the sport is. And it's very laser focused. In order to get good at jiu-jitsu, you have to do a lot of jiu-jitsu, right? Nothing else. Now, if you want to get stronger, you can't get stronger with jiu-jitsu, which is why you got to cross-train and focus on strength only. You don't need to be focusing on conditioning, okay? You don't need to be doing high-intensity interval training. That's just a complete waste of time. You don't need to be doing any other additional, pure conditioning type exercises. That doesn't mean that you can't do them, but that should not be the focus of your strength training outside of the mat, because you're going to get all of the conditioning that you need for jiu-jitsu. Okay, so jiu-jitsu, as you've noticed, the conditioning for jiu-jitsu is very specific. There's almost nothing that can, what's up, Fern? There's almost nothing that can prepare you for the mat, right? Whether it's grappling, wrestling, or BJJ. There's nothing. You can do all the kettlebell swings in the world. You can do all the sprinting in the world. You can do everything, every conditioning and strength training that you want. But the moment you get on the mat, it's like a rude awakening, because it's a different kind of conditioning, right? So if you need to get that specific conditioning to improve your conditioning for BJJ. So if you want to get better condition for BJJ, more rounds, more drilling, quit taking breaks off in between rounds, right? So that is how you're going to get more conditioning specific to jiu-jitsu. Okay, you don't need to be doing exercises outside of jiu-jitsu that are kind of sport-specific training. Okay, I don't believe in sport-specific training. There are some things that have some carryover, but for the most part, you don't need to be doing sport-specific type training. So, as BJJ guys, we start to make our training too complex. So the more complex the sport, so let's say like BJJ, right? That's what we're talking about. the more complex the sport, the simpler our strength training needs to be, right? So I think probably about a few months ago, I gave you 5 key movements, 5 key exercises that you should be focusing on as a part of your BJJ practice. And you're going to pick 1 or 2 of those, and you'll program your strength training around that. Let me see if I can find that in my notes here. So I mentioned, let's see if I can find it here. I had it. Okay. 5 key pieces that you want to focus your strength training around. A press, pull up, deadlift, the Turkish get up, and there's another one, which is, I'm surprised I don't know why I can't find it. Oh, here it is. The get up, the deadlift, the swing, the press, and a pull up. So those 5, the get up, the deadlift, the swing, the press, and the pull up. Okay? Those are the majority of the exercises that you'll want to incorporate. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to do all 5 in one training session. You're going to pick 2, maybe 3 of those and focus your training around that. So you want to pick a lower body pull. So that would be the deadlift or that would be the swing. Okay? If you're doing the deadlift or swing, you would then want to incorporate a press. So like the strict clean and military press, or any variation of the military press, like a push press, or even a jerk as you get more skilled down the road, which we'll get into kettlebell jerks later down the road. So the more complex your sport, the point to take away here is the more complex the sport, the simpler that you want your training. So for example, my training is based around the strict press, okay, or any variation of the press. Like right now I'm going through a clean and jerk protocol. But my program is based on the barbell deadlift. Barbell deadlift is my staple. That is something that I pretty much train pretty much all year. I take usually about, 3 months off total scattered out throughout the year between deadlift training. And it's very simple. I'm just working on the barbell deadlift and the strict press, and then I get my conditioning for jiu-jitsu. That's how simple my program is for my strength training. So what can happen is if we start to add, so our body has 3 energy systems, okay? So our body has what we call the bioenergetic continuum. 3 energy systems. One is called the aerobic or oxidative pathway, okay? So you can think of that as like running, right? Like you're going to go run for a few miles. That oxidative or that aerobic pathway is you can continue to do cardiovascular work for long periods of time. You can actually do it up to 7 straight days. So you can like run or some kind of like low impact, long distance cardio. That's your aerobic pathway. Then you have the next one in line is your glycolytic pathway or glycolysis. This is something that you can do at a moderately intense effort, but you can only do it for intense for like 30, it kicks in at about 30 minutes. Once you're training, it kicks in at about 30 minutes, but your power slowly decreases. One of the downfalls of this glycolytic pathway is this is where you start to develop acidity. This is where you become very acidic and you start developing things like that muscle burn, right? Like the hydrogen ions, which can be confused with lactic acid, lactate. So when you start getting that burning in your muscles, in your strength training, you're in that glycolytic pathway. And that's the pathway that you actually want to avoid. You do not want to be in that pathway. Why? Because in jiu-jitsu, you're in that pathway the whole time you're training jiu-jitsu. Okay? You're in that pathway the entire time. Whether you're doing the drills or you're doing the warm-up, you're being explosive enough to keep moving for about 20 to 30 minutes. You're doing 5-minute rounds, 10-minute rolling rounds, right? So that you're constantly in that glycolytic pathway. So you want to completely avoid that in your strength training. Okay? You want to avoid the acidity. You don't want to be acidic in your strength training. You want to either be working on full all-out power, which is alactic, okay, the lactic or the lactic pathway, which is like a sprint. You can only maintain that power for like 8 to 10, 12 seconds. After that, your power starts decreasing, and then you switch to the glycolytic pathway, and then you'll pretty much stay there. And then from there, you would switch into, so it's kind of like this down tier. Like you start at alactic, and you kind of slowly work your way down the more you keep training. So if you think of alactic, so if you think of like A means without, Okay, so if you think of like asymmetry or a whatever, it means without. So alactic pathway means without lactate. So that is that power pathway. But you're only going to be able to maintain that power for 8, 10, or even 12 seconds of absolute power. So that's the pathway that you want to train in, or the aerobic. One of the two, you want to avoid the glycolytic pathway. This is specific for training jiu-jitsu, wrestling, any kind of grappling, MMA. You want to avoid that because that's the pathway that you're constantly in. So for instance, let's say we're using kettlebells, okay? Doing sets of 30 swings or 30 or 40, 50 snatches in a set is a complete waste of time. Why? Because after that 12 seconds of snatching, which is roughly, one snatch takes roughly, depends on how fast you're going, your cadence. One snatch will take 2 to 3 seconds. One swing will take about 1.5 seconds. So if you're doing, let's say it takes you 3 seconds to do a snatch, you can only do 4 snatches, which is all-out power. You can only do 4 snatches before you leave that power pathway and you're now in that glycolytic pathway. Anything beyond 4 snatches, you're now entering glycolysis and you're going to start getting acidic, right? Your legs are going to start burning, your grip is going to start burning, and that's not where you want to be. For jiu-jitsu, okay? For jiu-jitsu. And pretty much just in health general, you really want to avoid that pathway. But there will be times when you'll need to hit that, what we call glycolytic peaking. So there will be times, let's say you're getting ready for a jiu-jitsu tournament, and you're about 4 weeks out. You can maintain that 4-week like a glycolytic peaking cycle, where we'll take you through some very glycolytic peaking programs, but it's just for 4 weeks, like once or twice a week. Other than that, you're completely avoiding glycolysis, and you want to train aerobic, or you want to train alactic. Okay, working on that power. So what's an example of training in the alactic pathway? Well, let's take we're talking about kettlebells, right? Kettlebells for BJJ. So kettlebell swings, snatches, push presses, clean, like your explosive movements. Okay, even the kettlebell clean. So let's take the two-handed swing, for example. You'll want to do about 8 to 10 seconds of work. Okay, so one swing takes 1.5 seconds. So if you're doing 5 swings, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 swings takes 8 seconds. So you can go. You're going to want to use a heavy bell for this. As your skills increase, you eventually want to use a heavy bell. So let's say a strong BJJ athlete, and you're going to swing the 40-kilo bell. You're going to do 5 swings, all-out power, because you're trying to deplete your creatine phosphate. That's what happens when you go all-out power for those 8 seconds. You're depleting creatine phosphate, and you're going to. But to replenish that creatine phosphate, you got to rest like 5 minutes. Okay, so this resting. Many BJJ and MMA guys think if they rest more than 10 seconds, they're some kind of sissy, or they're like, oh, I've got to know what it feels like to be tired. Well, there's time for that. We'll peak you the last 4 weeks leading into your BJJ competition. But whenever we're talking about strength training, like we're using the kettlebell swing, you're going to do 4 to 5 swings all out. Okay, all out power. That will be 100% alactic pathway. Then you're going to rest before you enter that glycolysis. And you're going to rest for about 5 minutes, because it's going to take 5 minutes to replenish that ATP, okay, which is that burst of energy. So if you're only resting 10 seconds, 20 seconds, you've come nowhere close to replenishing that pathway to go again, okay? So you want to train as heavy as possible, as powerful, and as often as possible, but also as fresh as possible. So it's kind of like a dichotomy. Well, how do I train as heavy as I can? How do I train as often as I can? And how do I stay as fresh as possible? Well, there's several different ways to do that. I'm not going to get into that today. But essentially, you'd want to do heavy sets of swings or snatches. Keep the volume between 8 to 12, maybe even 15 seconds would be pushing it. 15 seconds of swings would be basically 10 two-handed swings, all-out power. Okay? And then you would repeat that for 20 to 30 minutes. Okay? So you're probably looking at doing 5 swings on the top of every minute, all-out power, and you're going to see your conditioning, just completely climb and peak, and you're going to see your BJJ game, the conditioning factor, increase tremendously. And then the last one, to close out, the last thing that many BJJ guys get wrong, and actually we touched on this on the last point, is recovery. They think, well, if they're not training 6 days a week, if they're not training 3 to 4 times a day, then they're going to get weak, or they're going to get beat, or their jiu-jitsu's not going to get better. One of my mentors, Jeff Newport, many of y'all that are probably around kettlebells know of him. I love what he says. He says that it's not about how much work you can do, it's about how much work you can recover from. So if we're doing all these, strength exercises, we're doing HIIT training, we're doing all these things, and we're doing jiu-jitsu, and then we're so sore and we're so beat up, that our next training session is not really good or very productive, or we have to take multiple days off, our training's not being effective, right? Because now we've got to miss time to recover. So the recovery portion is crucial. Plus, it's going to help you with longevity. If you do not give your body plenty of rest, you can guarantee that your jiu-jitsu training career won't last very long. And I can honestly say, and I'm happy to say, that I've been able to train jiu-jitsu for almost 17 years. I'm not broken. I can still lift really heavy. I've got great mobility. I've got great endurance. And I've had my share of little injuries here and there, but nothing that has kept me from constantly training. And that's because I listen to my body. I still train hard. I still train jiu-jitsu 3 to 4 days a week. I still lift 3 to 4 days a week, really heavy. And I've been able to do this and maintain this for almost 17 years. And it's because I pay attention to recovery. Recovery is absolute paramount. So recovery, that could be between rounds. Maybe don't feel like, well, if I don't do 37 10-minute rounds, then I'm a puss. No. Here's how, I'll give you an example training for myself. I approach my jiu-jitsu training the same exact way I approach my strength training. I don't go all out every single day of the week. You can't. Think of the NFL. Imagine in the NFL, do they play games every single day? Because a game is the equivalent of like doing a 1-rep max, going all out, 100% competitive edge, right? In the NFL, do they play every day? No. What are they doing Monday through Saturday? They're recovering. They're working on drills. They're working on their technique. They're studying they're studying their video. They're studying their opponent. They're approaching their training as a practice, right? They're constantly practicing through the week, and then they play on game day. So I look at my BJJ and I look at strength training the exact same way. I'm not trying to go all out, right? You hear all these stupid things, go hard or go home, bro, no pain, no gain. Well, that's why in 5 years you're broken, and in 17 years I've been able to continue my training, right? And it's not because I'm younger. I'm approaching 40 years old here in a couple of years, and I'm able to still maintain this type of training. So the way I structure my training is I have one day where I do kind of like open mat. Many of us here that are familiar with BJJ, it's like open mat, and I do that pretty much one day a week, or sometimes only twice a month. I'll go all out, and I'll go at it really hard. But the majority of the time, I'm doing a lot of drills. I'm doing a lot of positional training. I still roll every time I train. I just roll very lightly. Or I'll put myself in specific positions, like really bad positions, and I'm working on the technique to get out. Sometimes I'll get tapped, but hey, I learned another way to get out, right? And then I go all out 1 to 2 days out of the month for peaking. To me, that's like my peaking. My glycolytic peaking is on those days. All the other days of the week, I'm working on drills. When I roll, I'll only roll 2 or 3 rounds, and I'll go like if you had to do it on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 is no intensity, 10 is intensity. I'm usually rolling at like a 60 or 70% effort because I want to maintain be as healthy as I can, but still be effective in training. So I'll roll like that pretty much all week long, and then usually on either a Saturday, is when, like, on open mat, I'll just roll and I'll do like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'll roll until everybody's done off the mat, okay? But that's very rare that I do that. Usually, like I said, twice a month probably. So if you start to approach your training that way, you're going to be as fresh as possible. You're going to be able to train as often as possible. And you're going to be able to train as heavy as possible. So in jiu-jitsu terms of training heavy, that would be a lot of rounds, lots of rolling. So I still train heavy because I roll 3 to 4 days a week. I still train often, so I'm getting my training 3 to 4 days a week. But I'm training as fresh as possible because I'm only going hard twice a month probably. So I'm able to maintain all 3 of those principles that I talked about. So remember, at the end of the day, it's not about how hard you can go. It's about what you can recover from. Great, you did 15 10-minute rounds, but now you can't move the next day. We've all been there before, right? Train, if you had to gauge it, like I said, keep your training at like a 70% effort. If you train at a 70% effort, you're leaving a lot in the tank. You're leaving 30% of that energy, you're leaving it in the tank for another day. And then, once or twice out of the month, you hit the pedal and you go hard and you train really hard and you push, because it's good to feel what that feels like, right? It's good that's that glycolytic peaking that I'm talking about. Going really hard once or twice out of the month to know what it feels like to have that kind of endurance and that kind of conditioning specific to jiu-jitsu. So those are the 3 things that we covered today. 3 very common mistakes that BJJ athletes make. 1 is we're constantly in flexion and we're not training enough extension exercises. 2, adding too much complexity to your training. All these different exercises, HIIT training and this and that, and boot camps this and this and that, and then trying to train jiu-jitsu at the same time. Keep it as simple as possible. 1 or 2 exercises. You're looking for the minimum effective dose. You want to train in the alactic or aerobic pathway, which means keep your sets of swings or whatever stuff you're working on 8 to 10 seconds. And then you're resting like 5 minutes between. Okay? And then the last one is recovery. At the end of the day, it's not how much work you can do, it's what you can recover from. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed chatting with you guys today. If you've got comments, you've got questions, leave them in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. I've got I'll post a link below. I've actually developed, if you're interested in learning how to strength train for BJJ, I've got a program that I put together that I run online. It's called the BJJ Strength Secrets Program. I'll put the link in the comment section below. What it is it's a double kettlebell clean and press program built around strength, and I also incorporate how to train for jiu-jitsu, different jiu-jitsu templates, and how to pair that together. So that's on my website. I'll share it in the link below, and you can get your copy if you want to learn how to strength train for BJJ. That's pretty much all I got for you guys today. I'm going to be heading out of town today, and I'll be traveling, so I'm going to do my best to do our morning video. Tomorrow will be deadlift secrets, where we talk about nothing but deadlifting and barbell. So tune in tomorrow. I'll be traveling to Salt Lake City, so I may do the video in the evening tomorrow. So have a great day, guys. Bye.